time for Licking on Lending.
Welcome, everybody. Good to have you with us.
Welcome to Licking on Lending, a weekly mortgage market update providing up-to-the-minute information on interest rates, loan programs, and hot industry news, all related to the mortgage industry. Brought to you by Transformational Mortgage Solutions. To participate in today's program, our guest call-in line is 646-716-4972. Now here's your host of Licking on Lending, David Lickin.
Let's begin.
Hey, listeners, I'm excited about podcasting. You know, I'm a fan of podcasting. I've been doing it only for 14 years, but we're finding we get a real audience as a result of it. And we're so grateful to have you as a listener. So we're encouraging more and more of our clients to get into launching their own podcast. I've struggled finding the right partner, to be honest with you, in the podcasting world, and someone who will do what I need done at the level of excellence that I insist it being done at. And today we have that person and that company on, and I'm excited to share this interview with you folks. So listen up. You don't think you will have a voice for podcasting? Well, that's just fine. But listen, we're going to challenge you. Everyone needs to be doing and creating a podcast and doing it. So we have joining us the CTO, the co-founder of the podcast, and we're thrilled to have Tom Hazzard being here with us. Tom, good to have you, friend.
Thank you so much, David. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. You're so enthusiastic. I love it. And you're very passionate about podcasting, I have to say. I know we've, known each other only a short time. I'm looking forward to a wonderful long-term relationship. And I really believe it's going to happen because you are so passionate. I don't have to worry that you're going to not record. And that's one thing when I encounter people who have the best intentions, but for whatever reason, they're either apprehensive or they just don't get to it. And they stay in this place of permanent potential. And then I can't help them. Right.
Yep. Can't help them. No, I think it's so important, but let's start with the beginning. Podcasting was just, when I started 14 years ago, was really still in its infancy. It had been around, but talk about an exponential, crazy amount of growth. Talk a little bit about the history of podcasting, give our listeners a little bit, we don't need to turn this into a history class, but I think it's important to understand how much growth there has been.
Oh my gosh. And you're right, David. There has been a tremendous growth. There've been a couple of surges of it. And you're right. I remember the very first time a friend of mine and his wife visited, my home, my wife and I, and this is back in 2004, or 3 or something. And he brought this iPod. He was an early adopter, and he brought this iPod, and I'm like, all right, what is this? And music. Yeah, you have your music on this device. You don't have to spin CDs anymore, or records or tapes or whatever. And that you also could listen to these things called podcasts. And I'm like, well, okay, tell me about that. So, it's come such a long way from those early days when honestly you had to do everything yourself because there wasn't this whole industry around it. And it was pretty difficult, very technical to even if you're okay with recording your content and publishing it yourself, but putting in the right condition where you could actually put it out on the apps, which at that time was only iTunes, was all it was on. Mm-hmm. But fast forward now, wow, 17-ish years, 18 years from the early days. And obviously podcast listenership has gone from, I would say very niche listener market of a few 100,000 people way back to now more than 100 million Americans just in the US listening to podcasts on a monthly basis. And I believe it's around 75 million of them are listening regularly to between 5 to 7 different shows. Now, I'm gonna actually early on here, when I talk about a show or a podcast, I'm talking about a show, not an episode. And sometimes some of these terms get confusing. And then if I talk about an episode, you're talking about, hey, you get one maybe weekly or something, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's so important that that we lay a foundation of knowledge and terminology as we encourage people to get into this. But I want to ask you this: why did you get into it? What's your why?
Oh my goodness, I cannot completely take credit for why I got into it. I have to credit my wife, Tracy, who is also the CEO of our company and is also did the initial research. Now, we had a business, we were entrepreneurs, had our own business at the time. This is back in like 2013 or so. And really, we were trying to find a way to build community. We were trying to find a way to reach more people, raise awareness for who we are and what we did. And she did some research. And then I also jumped on that bandwagon and did some research. I think we, between the two of us, read 24 books about podcasting. We listened to even more, maybe 36 episodes of podcasts about podcasting. And then I'm more of a video guy. I watched probably 50 different videos about podcasting. We started to do our research. This was over maybe 6 or 8 months we did that research.
How long ago was that?
Oh, it was like it was a decade ago from now. Not, I didn't start as early as you did. You've been doing it for 14 years. I'm maybe a decade. Okay. So we did all this research for 6 or 8 months and then decided, okay, I think there's something here. We want to give it a try. And then the planning and execution took like another 4 to 6 months. Wow. And because we had to do it ourselves, a lot of it in terms of the planning and there's a lot of different elements, materials, you might call them, you have to create to be able to launch a podcast and register it on the listening apps. But then there was also the equipment and recording it. And at the time, I spent probably $1,500 in equipment at the time for getting ready to record. And today you don't need to do that. I mean, you the typical podcaster spending $100 on a high quality microphone and actually probably even doesn't have to be quite that much. With modern computer technology, the way things have advanced is really all you need. But and then we planned, and then we had employees working for us who would help with certain things in preparation. And then we hired other people to do the audio editing. And then we were doing video. So we were doing video editing. And I mean, it was complex, and we built a team to do it.
So important.
It was important. And it was the only way really we could do it back then. It wasn't like today where you have all different kind of ads coming to you on LinkedIn or Facebook with, providers that do part of it or all of it. But as we did it though, see, we are business people that were needing to market and grow our brand. That was, really why we got into it, raise awareness for who we are and what we did. And as we did that, we were reading all the different gurus in podcasting. They all would tell you a part of the story. But we reading between the lines, we could tell they were all holding something back. They weren't completely transparent about everything you need to do to be successful. And I think some of them maybe didn't really know. So as we experimented, we discovered many things that took it from, just being creative and providing value, providing content to others over an audio platform as an audio show. For us, it became much more than that. It was a way to generate content that we would have, materials, graphics, clips, things to share on social media. It became a way to fuel our website for organic traffic from Google search. It became so many more things that nobody was talking about and sharing with you how to do. And at first it was just, hey, we're doing it better than everybody else. We're getting more out of it. We're marketing or growing our brand. But what ended up happening to us is as podcasting continued to grow and became more trendy and it wasn't just a trend or a fad, it's now become a primary vehicle a lot of people want to consume their content through. Because they can do it while they're driving. I do it while I'm at the gym. There are many things, many benefits to it as a medium. But we got to the point where other people in business, kind of like you and me, David, and how we met and were introduced, other people would say, wow, Tom, that's great what you guys are doing. Could you do that for me? And at first I was like, oh, well, that's not really the business I'm in. And at the time it wasn't. But then I realized, well, I'm spending thousands of dollars every month for this team and these resources. If I have somebody else I can leverage those resources against, I would reduce my costs. Okay, maybe we can try that. And it became 1, and then it became 5, and then it became 12. And finally, by 2016, it's really its own business. And it's funny because at the time, I mentioned we had another business we were operating, and our podcast was just one part of that, one piece of that, one thing we did to market and grow our brand. But it got to the point where it was getting so big, and then we had some dedicated employees to it, where I'm like, Tracy, I think this is a business. This is emerging. There's an opportunity here. And there was enough we were doing that was unique. We weren't just doing the same thing everybody else was doing. We had some proprietary processes and things we were doing that made podcasting more effective for the people that we were doing it for, including ourselves. So then it actually made sense. I'm like, Tracy, we're entrepreneurs, we're business people. I think this business could be big. I mean, I think it could be a 7-figure business in a year. Wow. And she kind of was like, well, I don't know. But it's like, you know what, Tracy, if we don't do this, what kind of entrepreneurs are we? I really want to experiment. And it was an experiment. It was. And she agreed. It took some pushing, but she agreed. And so for a while there, I was the CEO, and I was running everything. I was the chief everything officer because it was a very small entity, right? And then very quickly by 2017, which was 5 years ago now, May of 20, well, a little more than 5 years ago, but May in 2017, when we had a dozen full-time employees working in this business, we had to spin it off as its own corporate entity, for tax purposes, among other things. It just made sense. We need to separate it. It was sort of muddy in our existing business. And then continue to fast forward by 2018, Tracy and I are like, all right, this is the business. This is our big opportunity going forward. And we stopped operating the other business, focusing on it. And Tracy came on as the CEO, and we continued to grow ever since. And it's what I love about it. It's less about our success as a company. What I love about this, honestly, is it just works. Yeah. As long as somebody like you, David, is willing to record the content, because I can't make you do it, right? I can't make you do it. I can support you. I can give you all the guidance, recommendations, and and strategize with you about what to record, but I can't make you record. As long as you record, it's a fantastic way to raise your level of authority, make you the center of influence in your niche, and market and grow your business, whether that's a personal brand or a company brand. And you just have to record. I would recommend a minimum of, 1 episode a week to really be effective.
Yep. And we started out once a week, and we're now producing, recording a lot more content, and you're helping us. When you look at the world of podcasting, it goes the full gamut from some of the most detailed aspects. You might like, well, I thought we were in a very narrow vertical market of mortgage lending. Who's going to listen to this? Well, we're approaching 1 million downloads of our podcast. It's amazing. And I look at the overall diversity of product, you could say, or podcasts are out there. Talk about that. So I'm trying to speak to someone who says, we don't have anything to talk about. I don't care if it's just one narrow little niche. Talk about that.
Oh, it can be what's wonderful about podcasting is there's no gatekeepers there saying, we're not going to allow you to publish a show on our network or on our app or platform unless you can prove to us you're going to have a certain critical mass of listeners. Like if you're not going to have 20,000 regular listeners, I'm sorry, you can't do it. No, anybody can do it. That's the wonderful thing. And some people do it all themselves and keep it pretty simple, and others get the support they really need to amplify their message, to bring their message to the world, to be seen, heard, and found. I mean, that's pretty much what every podcaster or podcast wants, is right to be heard by more and more of their ideal listeners. And you really, it can't, the topics are incredibly narrow. Like you can have podcasts that maybe are only listened to by 100 people on a regular basis, and it's on some scientific topic that's very educationally focused, and only those people that have a PhD in that field are going to listen to it. But that's okay. That has value for that audience, right?
Right. It's not about the size. It's about the impact that you can have on the size that listens.
It really is. And then, you'll have things that are for, expectant mothers, new mothers, of
Or a short season in someone's life where they're in that stage of life, they're in that milestone, that time, and it's so special. It's amazing. One of the things that I'm thinking about, one particular individual that he loves fly fishing, and he wanted to talk to other people who did fly fishing, so he launched a fly fishing podcast. Much to his shock and amazement, he got a huge listening audience. There's fishing, a broad category. Fly fishing is a narrow category, and even within that narrower category, he has it segmented down, and he still has thousands of listeners. And advertisers started knocking on the door. Hey, we love your podcast. Would you mind talking about our rods and our reels? And he was saying, just it was blown away. And I had that happen with me in my podcast. But talk about that.
Yeah. So I'll give you another example, and this one didn't start out as a business opportunity, but became one. A similar podcast in a very niche topic of white-tailed deer hunting. So I talk about like outdoors sort of, or outdoors sportsman hunting sort of shows. There's lots of them, but not just a general show about hunting, but hunting white-tailed deer. That there's enough people. Are there enough people to be interested in that? I mean, when I first heard about it, I was like, honestly, I'm not a hunter. My brother-in-law is. I didn't know white-tailed deer hunting was a thing. And I talked to him about it. He's like, oh yeah, there's a lot of people into that. And then when we start supporting this podcast, which is called Whitetail Rendezvous, now that show ran for 500 some odd episodes, and the host was quite old, retired, and he's really even retired from that now. But in its day, oh my goodness, huge audience of tens of thousands of people listening to this podcast. And then, yes, you're right, lots of different brands who sell products that are really a good fit for the white-tailed deer hunter flocked to the podcast to say, hey, can we put an ad on your shows and we'll pay you for it? And then it became a side business for him. Really, he was generally a really retired guy, just passionate about his topic. And I guess, you know what, David, that's the real important thing that we can probably emphasize here, regardless of your subject. And I know a lot of your audience are business people, and you and I are business people. Podcasts for business are incredibly valuable. And there's, we're giving a couple of examples that are not necessarily businesses first, but I don't want anyone to think that means there isn't an opportunity for businesses. There's actually, in some ways, I think, a bigger opportunity for businesses than just personal or special interest subjects. But the key is, though, whoever is the spokesperson, the host, the talent on the show, even if don't think you're a natural speaker, you know what, you can be coached and trained and get experience. The real key ingredient is passion. As long as you got to bring the energy. And if you are knowledgeable, you have experience in your career or in a hobby or in something, you have experience, you have knowledge to share, you are passionate about sharing it with others, as long as that is true, then you can actually have sort of the trifecta of serving yourself in having a creative outlet, or to be sharing your knowledge with others. You're providing that listener value where, they're getting value for free. And boy, when they hear you in their ears every week, they know you and trust you, even though they've never met you. And I want to come back to that point in a minute. But the third part is you provide tremendous value to a sponsor, because that, as long as that sponsor, whatever it is that they're offering your listener, is in alignment with why people are listening, then listeners convert to calls to action from
Mhm.
sponsors at very high rates of conversion. We see between 30 and 40% of
Wow,
listeners
conversion rate.
will
Wow.
respond. And also statistically, so you know, when people listen to radio or television, watch television, statistically, you know, Nielsen and other people have reported this. It's well documented. About 5 to 6% of those audiences don't mind hearing ads from sponsors. In the podcasting industry, it's 65 to 70% don't mind hearing
Wow.
ads from sponsors. And it's because they've opted in to listen to the show. They're not turn on a channel randomly and there's something on there that maybe isn't relevant to them. They've chosen to listen to your show. And because they value what you're providing them in terms of content, if you feel the need to have an ad on your show or have sponsors on your show to keep giving them that value for free, they don't mind it. But again, when the sponsors are relevant to why you're listening, not only do you not mind it, you might really appreciate it. It's like, oh my gosh, I've been looking for a
Happened.
resource like that, or I've been looking for a product like that. And
Yep.
that's why people respond well to it.
Yeah. And we've got our advertisers getting reports saying from, people that listen to us on the podcast, let's just talk about that particular sponsor and their products and services. And they'll say, I didn't know that such and such offers this particular product. I thought they were in this part of it. So it does broaden awareness. It's so true. You talked about the fact that equipment wise, $100 can get you into the podcasting business. All of $100. That's just amazing. Most of us spend that much in a too short a time on coffee. Then you talked about the person with passion. Let's talk to the person. They say, yeah, but my voice, I don't like my voice. Talk to that person. I've always said this. We've been listening to your voice all along. That's the voice God gave you. I don't know what other voice you think you should have. You do have a rich resonance in your voice. I'm a vocal major. Some people say, boy, you can sure tell you have a voice for radio or television or whatever. But a lot of people aren't blessed with a particular voice, but it's unique. And I think the more unique the voice, the better there is at building a brand around that voice.
I agree with that. You know, David, I do think there is something to be said that a lot for I just for some full transparency here, that a lot of podcasters, whether they have a natural speaking ability or not, when they start podcasting for the first time, they're a little more green, maybe, make a little more mistakes. There's a little nervousness, maybe a few too many ums and ahs or awkward pauses. Now, all that can be fixed in editing, but what happens eventually, as long as you keep doing it consistently, you get naturally better at it, and your editors have less work to do because you deliver your message with fewer of those, I would say, common, nervous factors within there. But you also, people who interview others get better at interviewing, but you can get coaching too into how to be a better interviewer, how to ask the best interview questions, how to ask the best opening questions. I mean, lots of things like this. We talk about that on one of my podcasts for podcasters, which is called Feed Your Brand. We address a lot of those issues, but you can also, if you really are very wanting to be the best of the best in audio quality, there are voice coaches you can get training from who are podcasters themselves. Most people don't do that and maybe don't feel the need for that. But if you really do and you want to get that kind of support, there's support out there for that.
That's a great point. When you're looking at the content of a podcast, how important is it is there a model? Is there a certain amount of time that someone should try to attain? We look at the 20-minute time window, 15, 20-minute that TED Talks are famous for. I've got some thoughts on it, but I want to hear yours first. I'm going to throw up some questions.
Okay. So this is a really good question. And David, it's actually from new podcasters, one of the most common questions we get. And the answer to this has changed over the years. And this is why one of the things that I strive to do every year, both Tracy and I, as co-founders of this company. Not only do we encourage all of our employees to be podcasters, and we give them some benefit to make it easier for them to do it so it doesn't cost them a lot of money, because they can help people better if they are actually podcasters and experiencing it themselves. But even for me and Tracy, we don't want to be advocating what worked 10 years ago. We want to know what's working today. And every year we start each of us, either together or separately, starts a new podcast. So we're experiencing again what's happening and how things are different today than it was in the past. And so that informs us of a lot of things. And that's why I'm saying this issue has changed. When we first started, we believed, and maybe it was true, that we wanted to keep every podcast to be under 25 minutes, because that was the average length of a commute for people commuting to work in the United States.
Data point.
So we started that way. What we found over time was our audience reached out to us, communicated with us, said, boy, we really love the content, but I wish you would go a little deeper. Why do you guys stop there at 25 minutes? And, we thought about it. We're like, well, why are we stopping? Well, we thought that was the right length. So what we've learned over the years, and I'll tell you right now, when we coach a new podcaster, we say there is no perfect length. There's no optimum length either. We do tend to see trends or averages, though, because we've now launched over 1,000 podcasts and are supporting over 1,000 podcasters producing their content. So when people are recording what we call a solo cast, and which is you are getting on the microphone, speaking to your listeners, sharing a nugget of wisdom, a topic, a niche topic you think is relevant, we tend to see those episodes being in the 20 to 25 minute long range.
Okay.
But some might be 15, some might be 30, but average we see 20 to 25 minutes. And when there's a discussion, a dialogue, or an interview going on with people, that's where we tend to see them longer, typically 40, 45 minutes or up to an hour. But here's what I tell podcasters. There's no rule. There's no requirement, because David, here, I don't know if you realize this, but as a podcast listener, I've started to do this, and I have learned of the trend of what we call podfasters, meaning people that listen to podcasting as their primary content. That's how they absorb content.
Yeah.
They're not reading the newspaper. They're not reading even news online. They're listening to it, or they're consuming information, just educating themselves by listening to it first. And these podfasters will usually listen to episodes at 2 times speed.
2 times. I can get up to 150 at 1.5, but 2 times, 2x.
2 times speed.
Amazing.
At first when I heard that, I'm like, well, can you understand it? Does it sound like the Chipmunks? I mean, what? But then I hadn't tried it. But once I tried it, really, it doesn't sound that much different than if you listen to it at normal speed, but you get through an hour podcast in 30 minutes.
Yes.
So now I would say there are some people that speak very fast, and I am not one of those. When Tracy and I are on a podcast together, it's kind of the tale of 2 different speakers, because she speaks very quickly. I'm a little slower and more deliberate. So that might make it tough for people listening, at 2 times speed. But different podcasts, you might want to listen to 1.5 times speed and not 2 times speed, but really doesn't sound dramatically different, and you get through your content faster. So listeners are going to listen in the time they have to listen, is what I'm trying to say.
That's so true. And it's interesting. There was a study done by those that speak faster, and I study public speaking because I do a lot of it. And so, but those that speak at a faster rate, at least during segments, doing bursts of really fast speaking, the retention, they hold the audience attention better. And what's interesting is that the retention of what is said goes up significantly, because our brain works at such a rapid rate, much faster than most of our mouths do. Although my mouth has gotten ahead of my brain a number of times, at least it seems like what comes out of my mouth. is that the most people's brain, if they're processing what you're saying, they're thinking, I wonder what he's thinking. And they go, if you speak too slowly, they're trying to figure out where you're going, what's going on, what's your motive. And they start processing a conversation within them around the words that are being spoken. So the faster you speak, I think you can get to the point faster, as I just did. So speeding it up, slowing it down, wherever. And then there's importance of speaking with punctuation. That's where you put a very deliberate, almost staccato type approach, music talk there, into the delivery of how you word. So you punctuate certain words with certain pauses and word pops, so to speak. So there's a lot of tricks and tips that go into it, but I think the most important one is passion. And you hit on that earlier. I think it's the most important thing we talk about is passion. Okay, so we can go on and on about this, and probably we're going to go on about this because I want to continue to talk about this. I'll have you back a number of times because I really want to create a lot of content for our listeners.
Okay.
Who are wanting to do this. But let's go to the topic. Okay, I'm willing to give this a try, Licken and Hazzard. I'm ready to go for it. So how do I start this process?
Okay. Well, there's a few different ways to do it. And I know you're a business show, David, and most people listening are in business and probably have marketing
B2B
budgets, and that's great. But there may be some listeners who are just starting out who maybe don't have a big budget. So I want to cover two different options there. Would that be all right?
Yes, please.
And I'm going to use a couple of visual aids here for those of you that are listening to the podcast. You might at some point go to David's website and check out the video because there's some visual parts here. I believe in being completely transparent, David, about what it takes to do it and do it right. I don't believe in holding anything back. Those people that can afford to pay for it are going to pay to get acceleration and save time. Those that need to bootstrap it, I respect that too. I started out once myself in business. So we have a boot camp that's free.
Really?
At our website, podetize.com/bootcamp. And it's 7.5 hours of video content and downloads and handouts. And you have to register for it as a user, but then it's free. If you want to learn how to launch a successful podcast, you can go and do that for free. But it is teaching you how to do it, but then you still have to go and do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So to be perfectly honest there, most of us in business are not going to be interested in that. So for our, for people that are in business and really just, they need to get to that point of marketing and growing their business as fast as possible, we have at Podetize a done for you set up and launch package to launch your podcast. And that's where we're going to do all the creative work there. Obviously it's your brand. We need to understand, your goals, your brand, your fonts, your colors, your brand guidelines, all those good things. You may have an idea of the name for your podcast, or you may not. We will brainstorm and help name a show with you, but there's just a laundry list of other physical things that have to be created in order to launch a successful podcast that you probably didn't realize when you get into it. You thought, oh, well, I just want to record my episodes and publish them. And you can, but even to publish, there are rules. Apple has requirements and you need to meet those requirements or they're not going to publish your shows. And so basically we do this all for you. All I can't do is record for you. We're going to prepare you to record, provide you that microphone if you work with us. But we're going to pull everything out of you we need, and you just need to review all these different elements or materials and either approve them or request revisions and record at least one episode before we can launch your show. Although we do recommend most shows launch with 3 episodes, and sometimes they want to launch with half a dozen. There are reasons why you might want to do that, but at minimum 1, and then you can be on all the listening apps. And that's also a service we provide, is you don't have to figure out, how do I get on Spotify? How do I get on Apple? How do I get on, iHeartRadio and all these things? It's a part of our service. We do it for you, including putting the podcast on your own website. And that's a whole nother thing. That you need to know about, is that a podcast, the way we see it in business today, it goes far beyond the audio show.
We have a large listening audience of mortgage originators, business owners that own mortgage banking companies. you have a really good story to share with someone that's a regular podcast with you that produces in a niche market. He's a lone originator. And I want you to talk about that because I'm looking forward to interviewing him on my podcast, how he got into it. I want to help bring his brand, increase his awareness, but also it's just such a great success story. Tell our listeners about that.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm happy to share that. And again, those of you listening to the podcast, you may want to go check out the video or certainly go to David's website because there is a blog post for this episode that has information about it and visuals. The show is called How to Buy a Home by David Sidoni. He launched his show with us a couple of years ago now. I think he's just over episode 200, I think, at this point. And he started with one show a week, and then he's kind of doubled down doing 2 episodes a week. I used the wrong term there, and shame on me. I'd set us up at the beginning. 2 episodes a week, not shows. Although there are people doing more than one show, and we'll publish 1 per week. But anyway, David's 2 episodes a week now. How to Buy a Home. He is providing educational information and value because David has a goal. His goal is to get especially what we would call the generation of millennials who are renting. And his mission is to help them save money and improve their personal financial position and wealth by buying a home sooner and stop spending money on rent as much, but they can spend often less than what they're spending in rent and buy that home, but they don't have awareness. They don't have the knowledge. They haven't been educated how to do it. So he is a real estate agent in Southern California. And originally his goal was to raise awareness for who he is for local, first-time home buyers here in Southern California. But what ended up happening pretty quickly within about 6 months, he was getting a reputation across the country because podcasts, quite honestly, are not limited to your local area. In fact, they're not even limited to North America. They're available globally, although most English spoken podcasts are, the United States is probably the biggest market of listeners, but there is Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand also. But he got quickly really a loyal following of listeners all across the United States, and they would reach out and say, "Hey, I'm a first-time home buyer, but I'm in Atlanta. Do you have a recommendation for a real estate agent here?" And here goes, the light bulb, and David starts to quickly build a network of agents who are, sometimes first-time home buyers, I think, would feel like, oh, this agent is too experienced. They're looking for the bigger sale or the bigger commission. They're not interested in this first-time home buyer. It's going to be buying a less expensive home. He found a network of vetted agents across the country that he could refer these people to. And he now makes more money in making a portion of that commission on referrals than he does in his local Southern California real estate business, that he's completely doubled down on the podcast. It is a primary driver of business for him, and he's built his reputation through it. And I'll share just a couple other visuals. There's a blog post created for every episode on his website, and this is part of what we do at Podetize, where he'll usually have a guest, and there'll be unique graphics for every episode. And he's got his website here that is called How to Buy a Home, which he didn't have when he started the podcast. That was the name of the show. But then, it became, the website is becoming a machine of a resource for the listeners.
Yeah.
And, David, you mentioned earlier about people, thinking about topics and do they have enough to say? And I have had many potential podcasters come with apprehension to starting a show because they think, I don't know if I have enough to say every week for a year.
Yeah.
Right. And when we brainstorm and we have a strategy session and we'll set out to come up, let's see if we can come up with 24 topics for your first 6 months of episodes, let's say. I have rarely had one of those sessions not produce 150 to 200 topics in under an hour. I mean,
Wow.
once you start brainstorming and breaking down, because niche topics, you don't want to try to do too much in one episode.
Mm.
Listeners want to take a deep dive into a narrow subject. And so, David does this very well, David Sidoni. And of course, I want to make sure, I know people listening here are already listening to your show, but Licking on Lending for your mortgage professionals, we're what you have engaged us to do is to provide the same kind of production support to what we would say multicast your recording in audio, video, social share graphics, blog posts for your website. And the blog post is significant. We call
Talk
it
about that, because that is such an important part that I've recognized it, but to get to the how to do it, that you guys are experts at this. And it was such a gift to have found you, Tom, and your willingness to jump in and help me and advise me and work with me as you have. But talk about the importance of the website.
Sure. The website is so overlooked by podcasters, especially existing ones. I mean, often when I find existing podcasters, they've really thought about it only as an audio show. And even about their podcast listing, I usually find at least 3 things that they didn't even know are hurting their growth, are preventing them from being found by more of their ideal listeners, that could be changed, in a day. And then, the following month after they make that change, the podcast is going to be found by more people. But you asked about the blog post. So here's the thing. Any podcaster's episodes are only searchable in the listening apps, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Google Podcasts, whatever there are literally 36 or more different listening apps, and you can use any of them. All your episode topics and what you're talking about in these episodes, they're only searchable by what's in their titles and those descriptions for each episode. So, David, your average show for the longer ones is what, about an hour?
Yes.
So there is 60 minutes of content. And on average, most people tend to speak at 150 words a minute. And there are breaks and things, but let's just say your typical 1-hour podcast, there is probably, 8,000 words spoken in that episode that are not searchable, because Google doesn't go into the MP3 file and listen to what was said and say, oh, somebody's searching on, mortgage lending. I'm going to match them up with Licking on Lending podcast, right? They're only can go on what's written in the description, and it's a small amount of information. So on the podcast listening apps and in Google, that's all you can be found for. However, we do something, and this is, remember I talked about back in the beginning when Tracy and I first started podcasting, experimented, and we were figuring out some things that were different that others weren't doing. And it really became the foundation of our business, and what separates us from other providers is we convert every episode into a comprehensive blog post. We call it a verbal SEO blog post, because what we're doing,
yes,
there's a lot of what we're doing, because we're creating this post to look like a magazine page on your website. And maybe that's an old school way to talk about it, because how many people read physical magazines anymore? Not as much as they used to.
The concept is well understood. Yes.
So we wanted to make a very good impression, because many people are going to come from a Google search right to that episode page, because what we're doing is converting what was said in the episode into text, into written content. And we're not keyword hacking or cramming. We are taking what you say and any guests say in your episode, converting it to text and putting it in a condition that Google regards as valuable content. So it's not a word for word transcript where it says David Licken said this, Tom Hazzard said that. No. We distinguish between who's speaking in a different way that makes it easier to read, and it is cleaned up, quality improved. Anything that's repetitive or unnecessary is removed, but it is 90% what was said in the episode. Google loves this content because it has such value. It's so rich with all these phrases that they know people are searching on in their search bar every month. So we put this post on the client's website for their episode. Google that same day scans it, and I can give you a very quick little case study, a little story about this from another customer who has a podcast on distressed real estate note investing. There's a niche within your real estate field. And we do these posts for him. And this goes back to like 2017 or 2018, where I happened to see him at an event in Anaheim, and he had an episode that we published it 3 days earlier. And so he realized, he did a Google search on the name of a company he mentioned in his episode, just the name of this other company, not his company, not his podcast. And when you Googled it, the second organic line item, the search result, was the blog post for his episode.
Wow.
And guess what? The website for the company he mentioned was the fourth result. So his blog post outranked the website for the company he was mentioning. And this is 3 days after we published it. So the point is, the day we publish it, Google scans that blog post. And there are many factors that go into it. You don't just want to put nothing but text, because Google wants to see a multimedia post, and there need to be valuable outbound links in it, and images with captions and all sorts of things. But they scan it that day and then associate it, because they'll say, oh, this phrase 250,000 people searched on last month. This other phrase 325,000 people searched on last month. And the next time they search on that, your post will come up in the search results. So that's really the code we cracked, and how you can raise awareness for who you are, what you do, and your podcast with people that hadn't thought to listen to a podcast, and they weren't searching for a podcast. They went to Google first. But once they get there, oh, this is a show. And guess what? I can play it right there on that blog post and try it. So that's how it's content marketing, but you're speaking your way to it.
Yeah, I think there's so many people underestimate the power of the spoken word, and we've been listening way more than we've been reading all of our lives. Even if you're an avid reader, you listen more. People are drawn to what is spoken, because not only do you pick up the content, but you're picking up the voice in which it was spoken, and you learn something about more. It's more meaningful. It's more sticky, or stickier, more sticky. Well, anyway, so much for English. But the point of it is that this is a powerful medium that's taking off. How can people learn more about you if they want to get a hold of you, Tom, to start, really having a discussion? Is this right for me?
Sure. So what I would say is and right here, those of you seeing the video, I've got a little microphone up beside me. Podetize is our brand. And if you go to podetize.com, and that is PODETIZE.com, it is really very straightforward. And when you get to that landing page, if you would like to have a free strategy session, which would be a Zoom call, usually it can be a phone call if you prefer, but we recommend a Zoom call. You just scroll toward the bottom of that homepage, and there is a calendar right there where you can book a free strategy call. So that's really the best way.
That's excellent. Tom, thank you so much for taking time on your busy day. It's been a delightful to interview you here. The amount of knowledge that you have and expertise in this area is really amazing. And I've been at it for 14 years, and I get on. I thought I knew a lot, but I'm getting on with you, and I'm learning so much more each and every time we talk. I think it's so important that people consider getting their voice out and being heard. They say, well, a lot of people are talking about the area of expertise I have. Listener, nobody has the frequency and the voice you have. You can read exactly the same content as someone else, and you're going to connect with a different audience because your voice is different than the other person speaking the exact content. So come on, get out there, and you'll be so thrilled if you get a hold of Tom at Podetize. He and his team care about producing quality. They'll help you through it. Encourage you to get a hold of them. Tom, thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
My great pleasure, David. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Lykken on Lending, a weekly mortgage market update with your host, David Lykken of Transformational Mortgage Solutions. Join us next week, and thanks for listening.